So, I know, we're like, not long.
I know.
Close.
Okay, are we ready to get started? Okay, it's 5 p.m. on August 24th, and we're starting this Board of Directors regular meeting. Could I have a motion to establish the agenda as published, please?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
All in favor? Students?
Aye.
Aye. And directors? Aye. It's 1050 in favor of the agenda. With that, we are entering our study session to cover Board Policy OE11, Facilities and Capital Assets, a long-range facilities plan.
Great. Thank you, President D'Souza, and good evening, Board. I'm going to bring Brandy and Fox from our owner representative and Tony Kuhn up to the desk here. And while they're coming, just to kind of reset, where are we in the process with our long-range facility plan? I appreciate you taking the time to review the video, which hopefully provided just a lot of background knowledge that some of which you already have, but I think it was important for the community, and thank you, Leroy, for doing that, and Brandy for facilitating. But obviously you and our staff, myself, we shared an interest last year in looking at our new demographics to engage in a new long-range facility plan. We formed it last winter. We gathered committee interest. We had a great turnout of applicants who wanted to participate. You subsequently elected Director Lurie and Director Glowitz to serve. We had over 30 community members. We have future parents, current parents, past parents, a past board member, and other community representatives who all participated. Our student representative, Asha, participated as well, and some other students. And I think the main thing, or something that you certainly asked of me from the very beginning as superintendent, and that you wanted in this committee, was a lot of public access and a lot of transparency. And tonight is your first time as a board to kind of hear the culmination of that work. But just as a reminder, we've maintained that website for anyone in the community interested in going back and watching any of the 3-hour meetings we had. Those are all online, all of the documents, all of the paperwork. So transparency has been important, and it will be as we move forward, as we talk about, anything that has to do with facilities moving forward. So with that, I want to publicly thank the committee. Obviously, 2 directors. The work isn't done. We still have another meeting coming up on September 11th, and then we'll start looking ahead to what is the need and viability of the committee going forward. But just want to remind us that tonight's presentation is one moment in time, and it's the culmination of the 5 meetings that were held in the spring. The last one, we actually had the committee come back after school was out, and then everyone went away for the summer. Our staff, Brandy from CPM, Leroy from Malone, they worked over the summer. We worked over the summer on this presentation. And none of what's being provided tonight is a proposal or for you to take action on anything. And that would be disingenuous to you, and that's not what you asked of this committee. What you asked is to convene a collection of community members who can help think through from many different angles the current state of our facilities, what's happening with demographics, and then as we look forward to the future, what does that mean? And so I'm hoping that from tonight's presentation, from tonight's discussion that you're going to have, that you give me the next banks of the river in terms of those next steps for community engagement. I know you're a long way from making any decisions about bonds or any matters, and I can't emphasize that enough, that so are we. We are a long way away from being able to give you any solid recommendations, but the one that has garnered a lot of attention in the community, we saw it in Bellevue, we see it in Seattle, you see it in any community. As soon as there's any inkling of closing a school, you get a lot of attention. The committee, with Bellevue having their conversations, and Seattle last year with our budget, they couldn't help but at least entertain that conversation, but it doesn't come to you with any recommendation or expectation. It is simply a window into their thinking from 30 committee members from our community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandy, Tony, and Leroy.
Great. I think Leroy's joining us on Zoom. And Leroy, you're going to share your presentation?
Okay.
There we go.
And can you, yep, I can see, you can see my screen.
Perfect.
And can you hear me? Okay.
Sounds great.
Great. Okay. All right. Most of you know me. My name is Leroy Landers. I'm a principal with Malum Architects. We've had a wonderful opportunity to work with your facility planning committee and district leadership to begin to talk a little bit about different approaches for managing your facilities over time. And I want to, before I dive into this, I want to put a little bit of emphasis on a couple of points here that I think are really critical. For those members of the community who may not be familiar with the long-range facility plan and are wondering, why are we doing this? What's it used for, and so forth? A simple way to think about it, if you boil it all down, is this long-range facility plan is really a tool that will help your community and also the district and the board manage your facilities over time so that they continue to support education in your community as best as they can and to really further the ongoing success of your students. That's really the bottom line, is how can your facilities support your students and learning in your community. The 2 points I want to reiterate that Dr. Rendell touched upon are these. One is that the plan approaches that you're going to see were not developed or proposed by the district themselves, and they were not proposed by Malum. We're simply facilitating the process. These approaches have really come directly from discussions that have been undertaken by your facility planning committee. So this is really your community's initial thinking on what makes sense regarding facilities based on the information that they have. So this is really we're trying to make it as much as we can an open and transparent process. The second point I want to really emphasize, which Dr. Rendell touched upon, is that in no way whatsoever are these approaches complete. We're not presenting these as though they're finished. The intent of this effort at this point in time is to have initial proposals that have been thought out over time such that they can be used as the basis for further community input. And we're well aware that based on what that input may be, what that commentary may be, these plan approaches could change. And everyone sort of understands that. So please keep that in mind as you're looking at these the approaches that have been developed. I think that's very important. Also, as Dr. Rendell mentioned, we had an opportunity to work with the Facility Planning Committee through the spring in a series of meetings. And those meetings were really all about the development of these plan approaches. And so at the beginning of the meetings, what sort of served as a foundational bit of information that moved the discussions being held by the committee along were identification of a series of potential improvements or projects that were really geared towards better aligning your facilities with the goals that had been established by the Facility Planning Committee. And these projects related to each one of your current sites, each one of your current facilities. So here in these columns, you will see this list of potential projects that were up for discussion. And across the top of them, I'm going to take a few minutes and walk you through them. The blue columns that you see here identify your older elementary schools, Island Park, Lake Ridge, and West Mercer. And for each of those schools, there were a series of potential improvements discussed. Those included approaches that looked at replacement of each of these schools. And I would note that in the 2020 long-range facility plan work, the facility planning committee at that time had identified replacement as the most logical approach, I guess, one way to put it, when considering an improvement at the elementary level based on their condition and various other factors. And what you see here are possible replacements at two different capacities at each of the sites, a 450 student capacity and a 600 student capacity. And below that, the associated projected project cost for those two different sizes of facilities. And I'd like to emphasize here, when it comes to project costs, the costs that are being referenced, these costs are very early costs that are rough order of magnitude developed in the absence of any specific design. And so we did go through a process that really helped identify a basis for costing that would be useful at a planning level. But I do want to say that these numbers are not exacting numbers at this point. Should this process move forward to a potential fund at some point, these numbers would be revisited and refined and made more accurate in preparation for that. You will also note at each of these columns a line item here for a possible logistics premium. And so that premium is associated with creating or constructing each of these facilities on an occupied site. Okay, so if you try and construct a building while maintaining operations, it's very possible that you're going to encounter a premium associated with that. So we're trying to capture that potential premium. And then Islander Middle School, again, above the OR line here, what you're looking at are the replacements, potential replacements of the older remaining buildings. And the total capacity then for that middle school would be 1,000 student capacity based on to align it as close as we can with your 10-year projections, and then the associated projected cost for that. And then a potential project associated with replacement of the track and field, because of the high likelihood that when those buildings are going to be replaced, there would need to be the track and field would need to be used for other purposes, either construction laydown areas or temporary housing of students while those buildings were being constructed. And so you would need to go back and do work at the track and field as part of that replacement project. If replacement were not selected as the approach by this facility planning committee, we also wanted to look at projects that might need to happen from a modernization standpoint that did not involve replacement. And so at each one of these sites, you can see the list of items. If the committee decided, no, we're not going to replace Lake Ridge Elementary, then there are other things that really need to be included. And in the red, you see, just as an example, we labeled it a must do. The state of Washington now has passed the Clean Buildings Act. And in order to comply with that, there are some energy improvements that would need to be made to the old building to keep the district from having to essentially pay fines moving forward. And so that's one of the items that you see here. Moving over, kind of trying to move forward here a little bit into the pink columns. These projects are projects at the high school level. And so at the high school level, both at Crest Learning Center and the main high school itself, the 2020 Facility Planning Committee determined that those schools did not merit replacement. They're in good condition and would certainly not merit replacement. That being said, there are still a number of potential projects there, improvement projects that should be considered. And so the list that you see here is sort of a condensed version of those projects. That includes the Clean Buildings Act at the main high school. So again, you'd have to make some energy improvements. There have been some discussions about the structural condition of the stadium seating, and the district is actually currently doing some analysis on that to determine whether or not any sort of replacement based on the structure will be required, but we did list it as an item here. And then you'll also note there were a number of condition-related and program-related improvements at the high school that totaled approximately $52 million. And there's a line item list of that, but for purposes of this summary, we've just sort of listed it as one line item here. At Crest Learning Center, a secure entry, and then an optional science art improvement that has been discussed. And then finally, at the admin facility, there are some accessibility and life safety improvements, including a potential elevator in that building. And that would be approximately $1.7 million, and then an optional parking lot accessibility improvement for 4.3. So this sort of painted a broad list of potential projects that had come out of earlier discussions and would be used as a basis by the facility planning committee to begin to develop whatever approaches they felt were appropriate moving forward. And so based on all of this need, we asked the facility planning committee three pretty simple questions. The first question was really, based on what you've seen so far, based on the need that has been identified and the condition of the facilities in view of the goals that have been previously identified by the facility planning committee, do you feel that improvements need to be made are merited? And if so, really, do you feel that a bond, considering a bond moving forward would make sense? And it was a simple yes, we do feel that this should be considered, or no, we don't, it's not necessary. And across the board, the facility planning committee felt that it was worth really considering looking at capital improvements, which would then begin to suggest that a potential bond at some point in the future should be considered. With that, yes, we then asked them, what should be done? What are the priorities for this bond based on the need that you have seen? And in conjunction with that, what they felt would be supported by the community. What level of financial support was really realistic, given the need and just sort of its relationship to taxation from a bonding standpoint. And from those questions, we broke the facility planning committee into small working groups, individual working groups. And we asked them through a series of gaming exercises to start to discuss and build different approaches for a potential facilities plan. And what you're looking at here is a very high-level summary of those discussions and the plan approaches that came out of that committee work. And I'll walk through them relatively quickly here for you. Above this black line, this group of projects here, that represents the committee's work looking at different approaches for an initial bond. And then, so what would be in the nearest future with regard to capital improvements? Below the darker line then is really the work that would remain in the future to be addressed at some point in time. And so we're really trying to track not only what made sense initially, but what the impact of those decisions would be over the longer haul for the district and from the standpoint of a long-range facility plan. So looking through these different proposals, you can see that there were two different approaches that were developed that really culminated in a sort of larger proposal for potential capital improvements. The first scenario A involved looking at the replacement of the remaining buildings at Islander Middle School. And it also looked at replacing an elementary school. And that elementary school was very specifically identified by the facility planning committee groups that proposed a single replacement as Lake Ridge Elementary School. And that ended up being actually across the board for each of the groups that proposed and included an elementary replacement in their plan. All of those groups identified on their own Lake Ridge as being the one that made the most sense to them. The other thing I wanted to point out here is you'll note that Lake Ridge was identified as a replacement size of 600 students. And so when the projects were proposed to them, the potential projects, they were proposed at 450 students and 600 students. There were two options. And all of the planning groups that ended up replacing a single elementary identified Lake Ridge, but they also, across the board, identified replacing it at a 600 student size. And so that's a significant thing to kind of remember as we move forward with this presentation. Also included in scenario A were a percentage of the projects identified at the high school and at Crest. So the committee was not charged with selecting or cherry picking specific programmatic improvements. They were really charged with, do you feel that the work at the high school should be funded in some way? And if so, how much of that work do you believe should be funded in view of a reasonable total capital cost? So here you see the 40% of the high school improvements being made. And so the increase of this, you can see the total cost of that is approximately $279 million. There were two of the four groups that were basically in similar alignment and developed very similar, not quite identical, but very similar scenario A's. And that $279 million, based on the information that we have from the underwriting group that's been working with us, would result in approximately 59 cents per thousand of assessed value increase in taxes. And you can see how that would then relate to, just for kind of simple math, a taxpayer in the community. So for $1 million of assessed value, and the million was selected simply because it's a simple multiplier. For every $1 million of assessed value, you're looking at an increase of around $49 a month for every million of assessed value. The second scenario, scenario B, was also one of the larger approaches. However, rather than doing a replacement of the remaining middle school buildings, this group really suggested that 2 elementaries should be replaced, and that should be really the emphasis or the priority coming out of the need that they saw. And in this instance, you'll see that this group, who was replacing 2 of the elementaries, identified Lake Ridge Elementary being replaced again at 600 students, so the larger size, and then also West Mercer being replaced at the larger size of 600 students. And the same percentage of improvements at the high school level for approximately $298 million, which represents a tax increase of about 62 cents per thousand of assessed, or $52 a month per $1 million of assessed value. So those 2 plans really represent the larger approaches coming directly out of 3 of the 4 planning groups within the facility planning committee. The 4th planning committee felt that a smaller bond or lesser capital improvements really made more sense and would probably be more widely supported by the community. And this proposal looked at only replacing the remaining older buildings at Islander Middle School, and it maintained the same percentage, 40% of improvement at the high school level. And this represented about $144 million which is 44 cents per thousand of assessed value and increase, or approximately $36 a month per $1 million of assessed value. After those four groups developed these plans, we had a follow-up discussion with them, and we asked some questions which suggested that it would make sense moving forward, both to the board and for community input, on whether or not a fourth approach should be put back on the table. And it was agreed that, yes, we should put a fourth approach up. This, again, is a smaller amount, as you see. So we now have two larger sort of plan approaches and now two smaller plan approaches. The difference is that this fourth approach, rather than replace the older middle school buildings, looks at replacing a single elementary school and including the improvements at the high school level. And so that single elementary school replacement, in line with the two groups that selected only a single elementary, that single elementary is again Lake Ridge Elementary School with a replacement of 600 students. And so that sort of summarizes at a very high level the four approaches that were developed. And I won't touch on in any great deal detail the sort of follow-up information that was provided for remaining projects, but I did want to say and bring to your attention that we did have discussions around follow-up work would be. So, for example, in a larger, sort of restating the obvious, a larger bond now would leave fewer amounts of projects later, and we wanted to track what that total bond amount would be, remembering that these are in today's dollars, track what that total bond amount would be over time. And so the Facility Planning Committee was sort of well aware of the long-term cost impact of the decision-making regarding the size of the initial bond, sort of capital proposal or bond now. So, one of the things that, well, we noted a couple of things that came out of the discussions that really caught our attention. Those things were that which I mentioned earlier, that the committees that replaced a single elementary school always replaced Lake Ridge Elementary School, and everyone that replaced an elementary school, whether it be a single elementary or in one case, two elementaries, elected to replace it at the larger capacity rather than the smaller capacity. And that choice that was made by the Facility Planning Committee, and again, I want to say these choices are not cast in stone. These are just these are approaches that were developed by the Facility Planning Committee, which are going to be used as a basis for broader discussion with the community across Mercer Island. So we're going to get more input, of course, pending the board's discussion and decision to do so. This really brought up the issue of consolidation. They're building additional capacity, knowing that the enrollment of the district over the next 10 years is projected to be dropping over time. And so we asked why those decisions were being made by the different working groups within the facility committee. Why are you replacing it at 600 rather than 450? And these are just some of the responses or some of the input that was given by the facility committee as it was discussed. So I won't read through all of them, and you can sort of kind of look through them here. But they really do range from some folks believe that there's a group of folks on the island who really wouldn't consider a bond unless consolidation was also considered. And I think that was really linked to higher utilization of your facilities and also just the financial realities associated with that. So here are a number of these different statements that came out of that, and we captured them and had a fairly robust conversation around the why behind the size and the potential consolidation. So really, when it came down to consolidation and discussions around that, knowing that everyone looked at replacing Lake Ridge Elementary School, and really specifically had discussions around the potential of Island Park as the school that might be taken offline. Again, I want to emphasize this is not cast in stone in any way. It's very important to understand. We asked them, why we need to talk about why this is coming out and what are the feelings around Island Park, identifying Island Park. And so here you have an opportunity to see some of the items that were discussed with the committee as we work through this. So there were discussions around the fact that any site development on the Island Park site always has some traffic challenges, in that Island Crest Way is a pretty major arterial on the island, and that site is really right on that major arterial. So there were discussions around that, and certainly a lot of concerns about the current configuration of the school, knowing that the future configuration might be different. Island Park has the lowest enrollment, both current and future. And some of the discussion around that is because it's a lower enrollment, if you were considering relocating students, meaning taking a school offline for purposes of efficiency and cost savings, you would have to relocate fewer students. And so that was potentially seen as a benefit by the committee. There was recognition that growth on the island, currently at least, is projected to come primarily from the north end, and that the Island Park site itself has a drainage ravine, and there are steep slopes kind of right in the middle of the site. You can see in this diagram here. And so there was a recognition that that site, while certainly not unbuildable, does present challenges that some of the other sites may not present. And those challenges could have an impact on cost of the school, construction cost of the school, and that sort of thing. Other considerations that were not specifically cited by the committee, that we would, after this was discussed, that we sort of observed and looked at it and thought about, is that Island Park currently has the smallest school capacity, and because of that, one could say that it potentially reduces the impacts of consolidation simply because it has that smaller school capacity. And another interesting thing about it is that its central location, when you start to consider consolidation, it really provides an opportunity to minimize what might be called a ripple effect. In other words, if you consolidate schools at the ends of the island, it starts to rattle down and affect students who are going to have to move at a larger number of schools as you consolidate it. And this would really begin to limit the relocation of students to primarily one school. So we talked a little bit with the committee about why they were considering replacing Lake Ridge first. That came out as a key kind of continuous factor across everybody. And some of the reasons that were discussed by the committee was that Northwood, which is on the north end of the island, was constructed in the 2014 bond. And so, the north end of the island got a new school, so to speak. I'm kind of rephrasing that in a way, I guess, to some extent. There was the recognition that while only marginally worse, Lake Ridge is in the worst condition from a facility condition standpoint than West Mercer. And so if you were going to make a move and improvements at the school that needs it the most in the district, it makes sense to consider Lake Ridge. And then also the consideration that Lake Ridge has a somewhat less desirable floor plan than West Mercer from a educational accommodation standpoint, in that there are really very few, almost no opportunities for teaching spaces outside of the general classroom itself. And that's primarily because the design of the school is just a series of classrooms off a long corridor, where West Mercer is really a different type of design that offers a little bit more opportunity of pull-out space or project working space outside the general classroom area. So once the committee had identified this series of approaches, we then sort of put the pressure on them a little bit and said, great, you've done some good work here. You've identified not only a number of different approaches that can be considered by the broader Mercer Island community, but there are large options and small options. But the fact is, Facility Planning Committee, is that you represent a group of people on the island who know a tremendous amount about the facilities now. You know about their condition, you know about their capacity and future and projected enrollment over the next 10 years. And you know what the goals are that have been established by the previous Facility Planning Committee that was ratified. Of these plan approaches that have been discussed and have been developed, we're curious and would like to know which of them you feel makes the most sense. Is there any difference between these, or are they all equal? And we asked the committee to take 2 colors of cards, go through an exercise, 2 colors of cards, and write down on a white card we wanted them to basically attach a white card to the approach that they felt they themselves, as an individual committee member, would support. What made the most sense to them, knowing what they know, and to write on the white card why they felt that way. And as you can see, by far the largest number of votes, we'll call them votes, by the Facility Planning Committee of white cards, which again represents their own personal thinking on what makes the most sense, came out to approach A. So 13 votes for approach A, where there were only 4 votes for B, 1 vote for C, and no votes for approach D. We also asked them what they felt would garner and make most sense, garner support for the broader community, because in our experience, sometimes there's a difference between those 2 things. And that's what the yellow cards are. And so we asked the facility committee to identify what they felt the broader Mercer Island committee would support or would be most likely to support, trying to read the tea leaves, so to speak, and to write down on the card why they felt that way. And you can see here that approach C, which is a smaller bond amount, garnered the highest number of votes with 8 votes versus 4 votes on A, 2 on B, and 4 on D. So these 2, A and C, a larger approach supported by the facility planning group, and a smaller approach supported by what they felt the community would support, kind of bubbled to the top. And I won't go through all of these because there's a lot of information here, but I will just point out a couple of the bullet points on each of them. When we took a look at the whys that were written on the cards, so the comments that said, I support scenario A, and this is why I support it. The top 2 reasons for the facility planning committee, for those members who put their card on that, were that they believed that it was time to finish the middle school and finish what the community had started with the 2014 bond. So that was important. And so you see that there were a large number of voting cards that identified that. And then the second highest reasoning for voting for the larger scenario was there was a feeling that it was appropriate to make improvements at all three levels of schools. So make an improvement not only at the middle school by replacing the buildings, but also to make forward headway on the elementary schools. So replacing Lake Ridge and not forgetting the high school and doing work at the high school as well. So those are the main reasons there. For scenario B, which was not identified by either group as kind of a major preferential approach, the folks who voted on this approach said that elementary schools are the highest priority. That was the reason that the people who put their white cards on this, that was the thinking and their feeling. And they felt that the cost of doing that, replacing 2 elementary schools in full, it was not significantly more than scenario A. So they felt they were very similar to each other. Scenario C, which garnered the most votes associated with projected community support. 2 main reasons for this, and the first one is very telling, I think, is that the cost range is more likely to be supported by the community. So it's a bond that's, you know, a little bit less than, or a little bit more than half of the larger approach, and that the community wants and expects to see completion of the middle school. So this is, again, finish what we started in 2014, and that's why the 2 big reasons why this garnered so many yellow cards. And then finally, with scenario D, the cost is more likely to be supported by the community. It's a smaller bond. And for the folks who put the yellow cards on this, they felt that the elementary schools need to be replaced and that work needs to get underway. So that really brought us to a point where we had 4 baseline approaches that could be put forth to the broader community. And it also brought us to a point where 2 of those approaches started to bubble up, so to speak, from the viewpoint of the Facility Planning Committee, which I think is a good springing off point for some really useful discussion and input coming from the broader community. After we had that those approaches developed and seeing that consolidation was sort of coming to the surface as part of the proposals, we wanted to touch on a few key questions associated with consolidation. And I have about four or five slides here coming up on the end to wrap this up. But we wanted to test the facility committee's position on building the larger school and the idea of consolidation, and just make sure they understood what some of the implications of it were. So what we did is we looked at first looking at the program impact of consolidation. In other words, when you move from 4 elementary schools to 3 elementary schools, one, does it work? Is there enough capacity to do that, to make work? What is really required to do that? And so we did a study, sort of a high-level study for each of the schools. I'm only going to touch on Lake Ridge here in the interest of time, but each one of the schools were looked at in a similar way, where we looked at the number of general classrooms, which you see in blue here, and the capacity associated with that. And then we looked at the classrooms which are currently not general classrooms but are used for other things like literacy and art and so forth, and so really tracking that, and the bottom line that really came out of this is that as you see here, 21 general classrooms and 1 special ed classroom would need to be utilized at full permanent capacity of 514 students at Lake Ridge. That 2 classrooms currently used for art and literacy could revert back to general classroom use if necessary, or those classrooms the general classrooms could be housed in portables. So there's a level of flexibility on how you would use that facility. And noting that 1 or more of the existing portables may be needed for general education during higher enrollment over the 10-year period. But the bottom line is that it is doable, and with some level of flexibility within the existing facility. We also looked at then what the implication of relocating students from a school would be. What is the impact of that? And we looked at this at a couple different ways. One is we looked at it if there was a consideration of consolidation within the district, even if you didn't do a bond, or if you did a bond and there was no elementary replacement, so Lake Ridge Elementary, if we would literally follow what the facility planning committee was proposing, replacement in the bond. So what happens there is if you would sort of follow the line of thinking that's been discussed by the facility planning committee, again, to be discussed by the broader community, this is not cast in stone, and you elected to take Island Park offline, those students would be distributed across the remaining schools, elementary schools in the district, and we distributed them equally, knowing full well that a perfect equal distribution is theoretical in nature. It would not likely happen that way, but it kind of shows you the math basically, and those students would move once. If you did a consolidation before the bond, so you've now consolidated before you have a bond, and then you decide to go out for a bond, it passes, and it actually includes replacement of Lake Ridge. This really begins to track what that would mean. And what it essentially means, the bottom line, is that 2/3 of the Island Park students would move once. So those students that are being relocated to the Northwood, so they'd be moving to a newer elementary, Northwood, and West Mercer would move once. Students that had been relocated to Lake Ridge Elementary prior to any bond moving forward would then have to be located back at Island Park once Lake Ridge was being constructed, and assuming that Lake Ridge were being constructed on a site that was not occupied. And then finally, as one cohort, Lake Ridge, which would include the original Island Park students, would move to the new school. So what that means is that for those students who are moving to Lake Ridge, depending on the timing, they would probably move twice. They would most likely move twice, although theoretically it is possible they could move 3 times, but they would always be moving as a single cohort. But again, most likely they would be moving twice. And Lake Ridge, the original Lake Ridge students would move twice as well. And then finally, if you were to consolidate in conjunction with a bond, so you waited to do consolidation until you actually had a bond, and assuming that an elementary were replaced in that bond, so Lake Ridge is replaced, so all of the Island Park students in this scenario would move once. So 2/3 of them would move to Northwood and West Mercer, and they would move once. And the Lake Ridge students, when that school is being replaced, would now move to Island Park, and then together they would move to the new Lake Ridge. So Island Park students moving to Lake Ridge would only move once. And then the final study we did, which is really this sort of impact on its capacity study, is we looked at how this might really play out as you looked at it geographically across the island. So here are your existing conditions now, and what you're seeing are the permanent capacities and portable capacities here, and the enrollments here. And very quickly, as I move through this, we wanted to look at it based on your current enrollment of this year. What happens if you consolidated now? Again, because this was kind of brought up and has been under discussion by this facility planning committee. And the bottom line here is that it's imminently doable. You will have an enrollment of 528 students. And so you're slightly over your permanent capacity. There's still portable capacity available, and you would have approximately one additional student in 70% of your classroom. So you go from on an average of 24 students in classroom, which is your target, to 24.7. At the height of enrollment over the next 10 years, you would then have 538 students if they were divided evenly. Again, that's theoretical in nature. And you would have one additional student on average in all of your classrooms. So you'd be going from 24 to 25 in this sort of theoretical division. And then at the end of that 10-year period, when it's really dropped to its lowest, you would be down at 518 students and only one additional student in 20% of your classrooms. Yeah, and then we also looked at it if you replace Lake Ridge at the higher capacity. So now instead of Lake Ridge being at its current capacity, when you replace it at 600 students, and of course it begins to free up additional flexibility when you build a newer, larger school. So you would then have a few additional students sent to that school. Your target class size could now be maintained. And I think very interestingly and importantly, two of the three schools would now have a situation where they would have separate cafeterias and gymnasiums, which is a pretty significant improvement from a programmatic standpoint. So Lake Ridge and Northwood would have that condition. And we asked as a last question of the facility planning committee, just to really put the pressure on them, since they all played with this in their approaches, we asked, should the district consolidate elementaries in their own personal view, knowing what they know? And of the group, and I should point out that our fifth meeting did have a reduced attendance. So obviously our sample group is now even smaller. We need to recognize that. There were only 11 people in this meeting. 9 of the 11 said yes, in their personal view, they think the district should consolidate, or at least certainly consider consolidating elementaries. 2 said no. We asked them, should the district consolidate elementaries? What do you think the community will feel about this? And surprisingly, 10 of the 11 said, we believe that the community will largely support the idea of consolidation. And 1 person of the 11 said, no, I do not believe the community will support it. And then finally, with regard to the timeliness of it, should the district consolidate elementaries prior to a potential bond? And this relates to how many moves the students would need to make. Completely split. 5 people said yes, the district should consolidate or should consider consolidating prior to a bond. 5 said no, we don't think you should, and 1 was undecided. So our next steps, last slide, is pending board discussion around this, the status of kind of the long-range planning effort to date. If you feel at some point as you deliberate this that it makes sense to take this out for broader community outreach, that would be done this upcoming fall. And knowing that some of that input may very well adjust the plans as they are currently shown. And our goal is to take that information and finalize the long-range plan update in January of 2024. So with that, that's a lot of information. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much. This was a very comprehensive set of work by the committee, so most appreciated. I'll reach out to board members first to see if there are any questions.
I have, excuse me, I have a question. If you go back to slide 5, which shows like the different scenarios A, B, C, and D, I thought it was curious that those 2 sets of projects have a pretty different price tag. Like one was like $144.5 million, the other's $160.5 million, and yet the change on the tax rate seems like it would be the same, by like different by 1 cent. And I'm just curious how that is. Does that have to do with like when the construction would take place, or what order, or like how is it possible that those would be the same impact?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that by putting the caveat on is I'm in no way a financial wizard by any sense. But having done this a number of different times, what I can say is that when the underwriters look at different ways of amortizing the debt over time, there are many different models that they can choose. So, the time, the length of amortization, there are lots of different factors. And so my thinking on this is that part of that has to do with some of those variables being adjusted. And just so you do know, we do have this information. We have, it's obviously a very highly detailed level of information. We're more than happy to share it with you. But for each of these, we have the assumptions that were made regarding amortization, and you'll be able to see a chart and actually see, how they laid that out specifically.
Thank you. And the other is just a kind of comment and question for future. And I know that when we've heard about this before, one of the things that we've heard about is the possible cost savings of consolidating, for example, losing some of that cost of that overhead of operating a separate school. But when I looked at that map just now showing, 2 elementary schools at the north end of the island and 1 at the far south end of the island, speaking as a mid-islander myself, I was thinking, ooh, what impact will that have on like our school bus fleet? Do we need to buy more buses? Will we need more drivers? I know we're already short drivers. Like the kids that were previously able to walk to school wouldn't necessarily be able to. We don't have super safe bike routes to school, that kind of thing. So just curious, and this is maybe a question more for Fred and for the other district officials, like, is that something that people have thought about yet?
It's a great question. We are in the process of actually putting together a really what we think is our best estimate on the true cost savings. We believe there's a theoretical cost savings and then there's a true cost savings. And what I mean by that is we know that we'll need the teachers to go wherever from whatever's consolidated. We need paraprofessionals, but you start thinking about, well, in theory then, maybe you need less custodians. Maybe you need less, you don't need a principal. But when you start looking at larger schools, you start thinking about, but you might need an assistant principal again. So there's a theoretical savings versus an actual. There are more students in those schools, which means if we're using portables, now Tony is has more runs for custodians. We may actually need another half a custodian. So we will have that for the committee on September 11th, and then we will have it for you at the board meeting on the 14th. Of exactly what that's going to look like. And just piggybacking on that, in looking at, that whole consolidation piece, I think one of the notes that I sent to the team when we were preparing for that 5th meeting is, these are musings from a superintendent who really likes his job, and we have to do this right because this is how superintendents lose their job. It does not it is not something that I talk about lightly, nor our staff, nor Leroy and Malum, that, whenever we're talking about this, it's important. And if the cost savings isn't great, to your point, Director Tucker, then it may not even be worth it to do it at all because of what it might impose. But if it is, and we're looking at our enrollment, we have to at least look at it. But I know that there's some numbers that were thrown around by neighboring school districts for what they thought the savings were. They operate schools probably in very different ways or whatnot. We're not getting to the numbers that some of our neighboring schools are getting to in terms of what the true cost savings will really be. So we'll have more on that.
When it comes to cost, when would be the appropriate time, and this is a question for Malum, to drill down not on sort of like the different programmatic approaches, but understanding what the cost basis is for if we were to go forward, like with an elementary school and middle school. And in particular, for instance, how does this align with price per square foot for other elementary schools in the region? How does it align with cost per student, with other schools in the region, and sort of have an understanding that obviously there's a range of expense that can be devoted to the same project, and sort of understanding, where that falls on the spectrum for these numbers.
Right. No, that's a great question. In your instance, I think what the current thinking would be, which again is certainly up for discussion and can be adjusted along the way, is that if after we have kind of developed this long-range facility plan, it is determined by the community and by the school board and the district that yes, it does make sense, and we've heard from the community, and I'm just saying this theoretically now. I'm not saying that this is the case, but we've heard from the community that there is support to make capital improvements and proceed with a bond measure. Then at that point, as you're prepping for that bond measure, and based on the plan, what are you going to replace in an elementary? And if so, which elementary is being proposed for replacement? You would do a higher level of specific study associated with that site. And so you would actually go in and you would do a conceptual plan or conceptual study for that site. And that conceptual study would serve as a much better basis for accurate conceptual level or budgeting purposes cost estimating. Okay, you would have an idea of, okay, we're going to demolish a school that is this size. The new school is going to be constructed of this square footage. It's likely going to be in this position on the site, which tells you how much site work is going to need to be done. And from that, you would be able to develop a higher level of cost accuracy.
When would sort of the ballpark approach? I mean, if one can decide that one needs a new car, for instance, and before determining what model that is, it's sort of, am I looking for a budget car, a mid-priced car, or a super luxury car, and understanding the spectrum of options that are out there, right? Or, when it comes to replacing the roof on the house, like there's lots of different options.
Right.
Like in sort of a high level, when would we sort of understand what that range is, and before narrowing in on where on that spectrum the community would want to go?
Right. Yeah. Well, to some extent that's been done already, but it would be done again at a higher level of detail at the time that you're doing a conceptual site study for a specific site. And that conceptual study work would be done, ideally, it would be done pre-bond. To get you at a higher level of confidence with regard to a budget that's going to be, accurate and sufficient moving forward. But what I would say is that even as of now, when we were looking at costs, and this was touched on briefly in the part one of this presentation, which was recorded, we really looked at it in two different ways. One is we took the school that you built back in 2014, and we looked at that in view of the Mortenson Cost Index, which is really tracking the cost of projects in a given region over time and what you might expect that cost to be now and then projected into the future when you might construct it. And then we back checked that and that was really done by Malem, the district, and a third-party independent cost estimator working together, where we looked at current square footage costs in the Seattle area and then escalated those costs up to see if those were similar. And so that really got us to a point where we had a pretty high level of confidence that the rough order of magnitude planning level costs are good. But when you do that conceptual design, that would be ratcheted up to the next level, where you're going to look at, okay, within the region, what elementary schools have been constructed in the recent past? What has been the specific cost per square foot for those? And what are the amenities of those schools?
Tam?
So I'm still kind of reeling about the price tag. And so there's a lot to observe. But I want to dive deep a little bit more on option B, in a sense where I'm reeling from the price tag, but the one that I like is always have the biggest price tag. I'm like, oh no. So I want to hear a little bit more about the conversation in there, in a sense where some of the rationale for picking A and not B. So when we think about, when I visit the schools, right, and I'm not looking at through with any kind of expertise. It is just me just visually seeing what the school is. It seems really clear that West Mercer and Highland Park and Lake Ridge have just the school needs to be upgraded a lot compared to the middle school. And so even though we might have completed everything that we wanted to complete, so even if we pick option A, and I don't see West Mercer in here to upgrade or anything, really, it really furthered the disparity, I feel, from the elementary schools right now, because there is a really huge disparity between Northwood and the other schools. We do Lake Ridge, and now even further, right, that disparity. And so when we think about who really, so for me, I think when, if we go to a middle school and everybody experiences the same thing, whether it's good or bad, everybody experiences it. So if we're talking from an equity perspective, option scenario B makes more sense for me. But I'm curious within the committee, what were some of the conversation about if we only do Lake Ridge, how would it seem to the folks at the other schools?
Yeah. Well, that's it. Go ahead, Brandy.
Go ahead, Ray.
Well, what I was just going to note is that, you're touching on really the classic struggle that every district that we've ever worked with out there, has to deal with, which is there's very commonly far more need in the district than can realistically be supported by the community at any one snapshot in time. And so you have to make these, sort of value-based decisions. You have to establish what your priorities are. And all I can say is that, nobody, I think at any point in time during any of the conversations actually had in their gaming work when they were developing approaches 3 major replacement projects. In other words, the remaining schools at the middle school and 2 elementaries, because the number is just, it's large and it's just not realistic. I think everyone very quickly came to that conclusion. And so this slide, I think, really summarizes, literally what people wrote down on their cards of why they felt it was important, one or the other, A or B. And I will say that there were a strong contingent of folks that really, what resonated with them is for the Islander approach is finish what we started. That, this is something that at the middle school, that school will benefit all of the students in the district feed through that school. And so whatever improvements you make there will be appreciated and felt by that school. And in fact, a large number of the classrooms that students are actually being taught in end up still being in the older buildings. So that was a big part of that discussion. And what drove them to that group to actually include the elementary was, even though they felt very strongly about finishing what they started, they felt it was very important, I think, to jumpstart and get going on the elementary work. The difference between them and the B group is B group just said, look, we need to take care of our elementaries. Let's get those let's get those finished under the assumption that our enrollment projections over the next year, if we base what we're proposing on that by building these larger elementary schools, and we end up taking the third older elementary school offline, I'm putting words in their mouth now, and I want to be very careful about this. But essentially what they were saying is, if we do 2 elementary schools, we're done with our elementaries. So I think that's where they were kind of coming from.
I can add in. So I've had the privilege of serving on both facility planning committees, and I just want to start out by saying generally, they exceeded my expectations and in a great way. And I don't want to go into too many details, but we know that, talk of closing a school is what brought a lot of people out today and piqued interest to start, I don't want to say paying attention, but we all have lots of different things. Getting involved, and then we encourage everyone to get involved, which is exactly why we did this, so that we can have this discussion. Nothing's been decided. The board is hearing a lot of this for the first time. But what I would encourage everyone to do is all of the meetings that this committee had are online. They're all on the website, and you can see, it's a lot of hours that many of us sat through, but just to put it in perspective, the first 2 sessions that were 3 hours were chocked full of information, enrollment projections, facility conditions, and then trends and anything else major. What?
Finances.
Finance, a little bit of cost, a little bit more general than we have now. But those things were all discussed. So that's 6 hours right there where you can get the foundation of what the committee was then kind of toiling with. Just so everyone knows, it was committee members and not board members on the committee either. It was committee members that said, well, our enrollment's getting to the point where we can't, how do we justify 4 elementary schools? So that's what started that conversation. So it's that information that I would encourage people to go to. That is about 6 hours of significant information, but break it up over time. And then the 3 remaining, at least the number 3 and number 4 were the big groups. Much of that time was breaking up into smaller groups, so you fast forward through that because you can't really see much of that. But then what will really help is the discussions at the end and why people were feeling the way there were, where each of these scenarios, each of the groups talked about the pros and cons, why they chose what they did, the cost in terms of the increase. The longer you wait, the higher the cost is going to be. So if it was up to me, my personal opinion, I'd say let's get it done. Like, we've got kids in 60-year-old buildings in conditions that we know we can do better for our kids, but it's going to probably come at a price tag. We all are still reeling from the 2012 bond defeat, where the opinion was we asked for too much too fast, and it's but it's so it's you go to all those discussions because you really can learn a lot. I think the committee did a really good job. Both committees, both years, 2020 and now, did a really good job of weighing all those factors. We have people who have deep connections to each one of the schools. I'm an Island Park family. I went to Island Park. My daughter went to Island Park. My niece and nephew went to Island Park. It is a magical place. It would make me very sad if we lose that. But at some point it's our responsibility, both the board and the community, to make decisions that are going to benefit our kids in the future. So we have to be having these difficult conversations. We don't want to spring it on people at the last minute. Ideally, we would come to a consensus and know what the community wants before we even start talking about a bond. So I can kind of point out the pros and cons, but they're really all there. And if you go to the discussions, you can see all that. We want this to be transparent. People might have other ideas of, pros and cons also, and that's why we're going to be coming out to the community to hear all of that. But do the work, because those questions are going to be answered. You might not agree with the end result. That's okay. I mean, the committee everyone didn't have the same opinion. The other thing I wanted to say was, the great thing about going through this process, as much as you can kind of watch the committee going through it, it's really a true understanding of making these decisions that will benefit our community in the future. We all know, and I don't mean this in a facetious way at all, change is really, really hard. It is, period. But we have to do the responsible thing, and we know what our enrollment projections are. We know why. If you go back to all the enrollment conversations that we've had in the board meetings in the last year, those things are discussed in detail. And we, you know, frankly, the numbers are what they are. Like the number of people that live here are the number of people that live here, and it ebbs and flows. I can just quickly conclude by saying, I grew up here. When I started elementary school, I won't say what year, but it was in the 70s. There were 5 elementary schools. It was Mercer View and Mercer Crest, and then well, actually not the 3, obviously not Northwood. There were 2 junior highs and 1 high school. In 5 years, we went from 5 elementary schools to 3 elementary schools, 2 junior highs to 1 middle school. And there were kids, one of my siblings was bumped from 5 schools in 5 years, 5 different changes, just based on closures and changes and based on grade level. It is much more traumatic, in my opinion, for the adults than for the kids. I went to Island Park for kindergarten. I went to Mercer View for 1st and 2nd. Mercer View closed, and I went to West Mercer for 3rd through 6th. I remember all of those years fondly. I don't ever remember a time where, oh, I wish I was there or something. Our friends went along with us. And I can assure everyone that whatever decision we make, the students' needs will come first in terms of minimizing impacts to the students. So none of that stuff's been really even talked about. And that, you know, it's our responsibility to make these, to look into these things, figure out all of our choices, and then choose the one that works best for our entire community.
Asha, any questions, statements?
Not really. I think the Director Lurie's right. Like every single one of the committee meetings, like kind of explains thoroughly what each group was thinking about each scenario. I think one thing to note is like every group decided that all the kids should be in one cohort throughout the building in transition. And I think the big thing that we talked about is as long as the kids are together, I don't think they care where they go. And if they have to switch schools twice, at least they're together during the building process. And I think that was really important.
Thank you.
We've heard the feedback that we've gotten from in the experience with the transition to Northwood is that it was much less of the physical building and much more kind of adjusting to new people for the students. So new counselors, new teachers, and if we do it in a way that minimizes that, there'll be a much lighter impact on our students.
A couple of questions on the tax rates. Are the tax rates in 2025, they changed based on that? Are the tax rates based on when we did the initial bond? I mean, tax rates have dropped as home values have increased. I'm curious what your calculation starting point was for that 2025?
I would actually have to go back and look at the actual data itself that the underwriters gave us. I don't know that they, I would have to go back and look. I shouldn't speak without, yeah.
Yeah, it might be different based on calculations of how we do it. So it might not be as much, or it might look more depending on when we actually make the calculation and how we make it.
Yep.
I think the other thing in your mind is, you know, it seems like tough to consolidate before we do a bond. I think that seems very, very challenging from many perspectives, even in terms of understanding how enrollment comes back. And then if we do consolidate before a bond, there's the bouncing around seems very difficult. I do think also when we do a bond, we will make the decision as to whether we have big schools or small schools. If we have big schools, I think that's aiming towards 3 elementary schools in our district, not 4. But if we do small schools, then we could have 4 elementary schools in our district. So the consolidation plan and the size of the school seem very interlinked. And so doing that at bond time is better. Also doing it at bond time allows us to have a swing school. That is, you know, whichever one we decide to close. So it avoids $12 million plus in logistics costs, so I think there's some value in that. I will say that the 2012 bond we kind of experienced was the something for everyone bond that failed, and so while I appreciate equity, pragmatism kind of has overruled us in that. As we're thinking about how the makeup of our community is changing, I think Deborah spoke about, we used to be a 5,000 student school district, now we're 4,000. The question is, are we going to 3,000 as our norm, or are we still going to be closer to 4,000? That's a huge difference in makeup. It means how many parents are on the island versus non-parents. So that changes the way our community vote versus individual vote will look like. And so efficiency and smaller bonds, the smaller our enrollment, the smaller our bond will have to be, because there are more people not in the schools with that greater self-interest as we've seen before. So a lot of things suggest we make our plan for the school sizes, for consolidation, when we are more ready to do a bond. My presumption is that will be around the 2025, 2026 timeframe, because the bond expires in 2028.
Can I respond to something? Just because you said that, so there's something for everything, for everybody failed in 2012. So for me, like there's something for everything, for everybody, it's not equity, right? So I think like when we put together, let's say we'll probably have more conversation about this, if we're just trying to hit across the board, then it's not just as much of a need as like, let's say option B, right? Where there is a need to kind of elevate everybody to a kind of a basic standard. So those are kind of where, but just kind of, I just mentioned that because you said that it failed. And so I also don't want us to get to a point where we do a bond that when we use equity, it's not like it's something for everybody here, you know. But that's our strategy, we could, right? But it seems like people would be they would be willing to spend the money if there's a need. Right, and so that's kind of approach that I don't think we're asking for anything that is be nice. So I think the community needs to know that we're not asking the community for anything that we don't really need. So I think that should be really be the message that, and it's true, but it's a lot of need. So really for the price, I was like, oh my God, it's a huge. But just thinking about the spaces around our community. What is that bare minimum to bring all different parts of the community and all the buildings up to a certain level of standard?
I wanted to just piggyback on what you were saying, David, that the idea of consolidating schools like in advance of a bond and maybe not even getting a bond, that I feel will be a very hard sell to both to the board and to the community, because it's one thing to say, you know, here is a vision of this like amazing elementary school system we could have with these like state-of-the-art buildings and all the programs and all the specialists that we want to put back into the budget, you know. And for that, your family will sacrifice maybe having 2 kids at the same school at the same time, or your kid will have to move schools once or twice. But to be like, we're just gonna kind of cram everyone over here, and maybe this will come down the line later or not, like that's a tough sell to me, I will say, as a parent and as a board member, you know, so I mean, and just looking at how many moves are involved, like I know you and your cohort got through it just fine, but the options where it's like,
It's not ideal.
you know, this third is gonna move, you know, 3 times, and this group is gonna have to move 4 times, like that would be, I think, really disruptive for kids, especially kids that have any kind of like special needs or just like emotional needs, where like the school is their security, like the school is their kind of, you know, like it's one thing if your whole school is moving, bam, great, that's like an adventure, but to be like shuffled back and forth, like,
Well,
I don't think that's anybody's idea.
And that's why we added the 5th meeting as the conversation was talking a little more and more, to really explain the complexity.
Yeah.
That there are so many nuances when you start talking about consolidating schools, whether or not it's bus routes or number of times kids are moving in, and we don't want there to be any misconceptions about it being easy or hard. there are no conceptions. It's going to be what it is, and we're going to be very transparent about that. So what I'm hearing is the direction for me is to come back in September with a more comprehensive plan of what a community engagement would look like as we would go through the fall. That could be either at the board meeting or we're planning a study session, either one there, to really have these exact conversations, because you too represent the community in the ultimate sense as elected officials.
And then my question also was gonna be, like, what form would this, like, community outreach take in addition to, like, us being able to talk about it at more length, you know, like, is the district thinking about using the Let's Talk or whatever that is, the city thing? I know we don't have a subscription anymore to the Thought Exchange that
we have a couple of different options that we are looking at and considering, in fact, even possibly a new product or sticky or going back. So that's all things we've already been starting to think about. And so that will be part of what we bring back.
Great. Can I just make one other, just urge everyone, we talk a lot on the board in the past years about, you know, kind of avoiding hindsight and blaming prior boards or prior community members for making the decisions they did in the moment. So, like I said, in the 70s and 80s, there were 5 elementaries, we went to 3, some property was sold, and then, you know, but it was a very different landscape. There was tons of vacant land on the island at that point in time. It wasn't like it is now where there is nowhere to build. Land was a lot cheaper than it is now. So anyways, my point is, let's avoid hindsight and blaming people for making bad decisions, because I can guarantee you that everyone made the best decisions they could in the moment. It's really important to move forward, but with saying that, we've learned a lot by going through this. And so we've learned, I can tell everyone there's no intention, if we do consolidate, no property will be sold. It likely would have another use rather than sitting empty, but the school district is not even discussing selling any property. We know there isn't any more to get if and when we need more, so that is not under consideration. Decisions that have been made in the past were likely the right decisions at the time. But we've learned going out in 2012, in the 90s, they went out for a big bond and it failed, and then they went for the smaller where all the schools were remodeled, and that passed, and then in 2012, the bond failed because it was seeking everything, and then in 2014, it passed because it was much more concise and specific. So let's use the lessons that we've learned about this community over time without poking at people who've made past decisions, because that's just not productive or constructive, but we have learned a lot, and we need to take those lessons that we've learned and apply them today.
Thank you. Any other last comments? Brandy, Tony? Good? Okay. Leroy, thank you very much for this overview.
You're welcome. And thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leroy.
Thanks, Leroy.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Should we keep moving?
Yes.
Let's move into the main part of the meeting now. That was our study session. Any recognition?
Just one before Brandy leaves. She's not going to like me to do this, but you have her contract on tonight's agenda, and we get our money's worth out of a lot of things in this district. And I think we do an awesome job with trying to be very thoughtful about use, but we get our money's worth out of Brandy in that contract, and what she's done for this district over the years. Through this process is just a small piece, but all of the on-time, under-budget projects from before, that doesn't happen without her. So I just want to thank you publicly, and I know your contract's on there tonight for approval, but just thank you for all you do.
Happy to be here.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now you're dismissed.
So, public input. Michelle is telling me we didn't have any public input for people who filed earlier. If there's any, I see we have an audience. If there's anybody who would like to provide public input at this time, just let Michelle know. We can do that. Am I seeing anyone setting up for public input?
I'll send them a chat through Zoom and I'll let you know.
And also, I was thinking in person, because
Just
Zoom
in person,
already
not the Zoom. Oh,
has a
sorry.
chance.
Sorry.
Do you have
Do we just stand up and ask questions?
No, we don't do
I've not been to one of
questions,
these
but you
before.
could make a statement to the board, and it could contain a question, but you may not get an immediate answer.
And you have
So
3
I
minutes.
speak once and I can,
So I can kind of give you.
because I got a few questions, like,
The broad instructions would be, if you would like to offer input to the board, you may do so during your 3 minutes. Generally, you have to present this information, present your request to provide input 60 minutes before the meeting. If you plan to address the board in person, advance notice is appreciated. The meeting is a meeting of the board and public. It is not a public meeting that guarantees interaction between members of the public and members of the board. When addressing the board at the meeting, please limit your remarks to not more than 3 minutes. Appoint a spokesperson if the concern is a group concern, and if desired, provide written documentation to the board secretary. Public comments that name or otherwise identify a district student are not permitted without permission of that student's parent or legal guardian. The board may direct the superintendent to respond at a later date to the issues expressed. So if you would like to take 3 minutes and address the
yeah,
board, please
great,
do so.
thanks. I took the 60 minutes as advisory, not required. So I'm Cam Boston, I have 2 children at Island Park. And, well, I'll just go. You said demolishing Island Park isn't set in stone, but it does seem to be the foundation for all of the other analysis and proposals and bond. What would the timeline look like for making a final decision on demolishing Island Park and busing my kid to another school a year from now? That's one. This is a speech, so I don't expect answers. Second question, Northridge is clearly better. The facilities are better. Are the educational outcomes any different? Do Northridge graduates perform differently at middle school or high school or college admissions or not? Does having a brand new school make that much more of a difference? And what difference is that? Lori, you mentioned there was a bond in the 90s for renovation that was successful. And these other big bonds have been unsuccessful. It seems jumping immediately to replacement as opposed to renovations we should be looking at renovations too. And I was surprised that wasn't one of the things the committee considered. I would note that the vote to demolish IPE was 11 people. So I'm hoping, it sounds like there's going to be more to decide on that. And then I guess my last question would be, and maybe this is in the materials and I just didn't see it, what's the interest rate on this bond going to be? Rates are at 40-year highs. Now doesn't seem like a great time to be borrowing a bunch of money, especially if we're already in a position where we're consolidating and laying off teachers because we don't have enough enrollment. If we're hurting for money for that, going and taking up $200 million in debt seems, well, imprudent. Do I have anything else? That's probably 3 minutes. Yeah. Oh, one last thing. One key thing that came up in the feedback for the superintendent search was community communication. In none of the announcements for this meeting was demolishing an elementary school mentioned. Even in the announcement from the PTA of Island Park, for which it's an existential issue, no mention was made. That's not good communication. Okay, I'm done, thanks.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate your comments. Most appreciate that.
Can I just reiterate? This is the beginning of the conversation. No one is demolishing a school anytime in the near future. And That was the committee's consensus. And there was no time, there was very little timeline on that. It's the beginning of the conversation. No one in this district is interested in springing anything on anyone, and there will be a lot more information this fall. It's the start of the community conversation.
I was gonna say, I appreciate your concerns. As Fred Rundle has said, we're going to have a study session at the board as to what we will do next with this plan and how the community outreach will continue with this plan. The other thing that was covered in the initial video, there's a video that was, available for recording that you could see that provided the background on this. I think we've talked about renovations in that, as well as the next bond is due 2028. So that gives you an idea of the timeline.
You just said that, talking about this plan, and just to be super, super clear to the public, when you say like talking about this plan, it's not that we have already adopted or are already definitely doing a specific plan, is that the district is legally obligated to have a long-term facilities plan. Like, we have to have some kind of plan, even if the plan is do nothing, paint the buildings, that would be the plan. So when we talk about a plan, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. With that, I assume no other public input? Okay, thank you very much. Public input is closed at this moment. Most appreciated. Thank you for attending this conversation and thinking about it. Please feel free to send us email to board@mercerislandschools.org if you have any thoughts around this. With that, to Fred, the superintendent report.
Great. I'm gonna head out in about 5 minutes to go jump on a plane to San Diego and take Callan to college. 2 of you have made that trip to take kids. The other 3 of you, it's coming fast. So I'm gonna head out quickly, and Aaron will serve in my stead as I take off, and whether or not you want her here or there, that's up to you, President. But a couple things. Pictures tomorrow here in the boardroom. So if you can please make time to swing in here. We also on Monday, you're invited to the, yep.
Is there the opportunity for like retakes? I think like a haircut for you.
Yes. Just like the students, absolutely.
I just want to look like I did in 2019.
Yeah.
I don't have to get a new photo.
If you miss 2, then we also have the schools when they have theirs, and we can get you a school list for you to go to. I had to go to the high school fees and photos yesterday for mine. On Monday, you're invited to the all-staff barbecue. We had a great kickoff today. John Crownapple, who authored the text, I think it's somewhere over here, Belonging to a Culture of Dignity, was our keynote this morning. I gave some opening remarks, but he was the star of the show. And then on Monday, we'll have our Instructional Technology Day. And you're welcome to join any parts of that as well, but the barbecue's at 11:40. Where we get a chance to see all of our staff coming together, serve a meal, and be together. And then I know you're also getting some emails about enrollment, and I'll respond to a couple of those that are more operational in nature. Just as a reminder, you're going to get a full, normally you get your enrollment update as part of OE9 in December. I'll do a mid kind of term update to talk to the president and vice president about this. Just because of how enrollment has been a hot discussion. So in September, I'll give you a more comprehensive update, but true to what I reported 2 weeks ago, we are up in elementary as far as our projections. We're up in middle school, we're up in high school compared to our projections. But it's also a reminder that we were projecting coming down, and that continues to be, so I'll have a more comprehensive report on that coming up. And then lastly, on the agenda tonight, on the consent agenda, are adjustments to our facilities, our prof techs, and our management administrators' salaries. We've completed our meet and confer process with them. And just kind of a reminder of, some of the percentage increases or whatnot. The pass-through based on the state's allocation last year, if we spread what they allocate to all staff was 2.55%. You'll see that commensurate in 2 of the groups. And just a reminder of great appreciation that we settled our contract with MIEA in June before the year had ended. And we're starting this year without bargaining taking place right now. You know, there was a 6.25% increase to our classified and a 1.3% to certificated. Certificated took less, so that classified could take more, but you know, I think we're in a really good position. We're going to continue to do comps. We're going to continue to look at our compensation packages, because OE4, that's your ask of me. So I'll be committed to that going forward, but appreciate everything that our staff is doing to get ready for the year. We're excited about next Wednesday. It's coming quickly, but we'll be ready. So any questions or things for me?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good luck on
Thanks.
your trip.
I'm gonna need it.
And Erin, would you like to come over
Come
here?
on over.
I know you've got a lot to move, but
Can we have like a 5-minute bio break so people can just move around?
Sure.
See before leaving? Is that okay?
yeah, we'll take a 5-minute recess as well. Can we take a 5-minute recess? Get started again, to return?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We are returning back from our recess and we are moving on to item 4A, budget and financial planning.
Excellent. Provided to you is our monthly financials and budget status report through the month of June. I want to qualify this with typically you'd receive through the month of July, but as you may know, our district is converting, if you will, our financial, our student, our personnel, our entire software system from Skyward to Cumulative. With that, obviously, we were offline for a week or two in July, and our entire staff, with much gnashing of teeth, is migrating that information and training also, hence we don't have July at this point. That said, June is through about 83.3% of the fiscal year. If we look at our expenditures, we're about 80.5%, so under budget there, which is a good thing. And then revenues, of course, are at 79.7%, which is under only due to the fact that, as you know, how apportionment flows, and then also as local taxes are collected in October and April, we see that kind of spike, if you will, in revenue in those months. In particular, I want to point out, if we look at, I added in the percent of annual apportionment throughout the year to see how the state provides that to us. Kind of the bottom right corner of the main kind of flow chart. Oh, sorry, up higher. You can see the 12.5 and 10% that comes in, which is a significant portion of our revenue in the month of July and August, simply due to the fact that's the start of the state's fiscal year. And so they feel like they have the money and give those to districts in July and August. You'll see a full comprehensive report presented to you in October for fiscal year 22-23. Mind you, last year we presented that in December, but as we become more efficient in business services, we'll provide that to you as soon as humanly possible. And we hope to present that to you in October 26th board meeting. Lastly, I'd like to direct your attention now to go down and to the left in monthly fund balance, cash on hand. You see as those two spikes, we get October, we get April, and then cash on hand gets quite low, or fund balance, if you will, as end of June we were at $425,588. Hence it'll spike drastically up in July and August due to those apportionment, which I touched based on. But also we receive a safety net, which is what we have to apply for special services, special needs, and we will receive almost $2 million at the end of this month in safety net revenue. So all that money just kind of gets jammed in there in July and August and increases obviously our fund balance. We are still on target, very much so, and have great confidence we'll reach our goal, our ending fund balance, hence starting fund balance goal for end of this year. And of course, you'll see that at the October presentation too. Any questions on that?
Thank you. No, that sounds great. Great to hear the reconfirmation on the fund balance as well. And thank you for the understanding and explanation around the temporary low numbers that are intentional and expected.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep moving. 4B, discuss process for determining legislative priorities for General Assembly. Deborah.
Thank you. I was hoping to actually get more work done on this before today, but I got some. I just wanted to have a super quick conversation about how we want to make determinations of the priorities. I know in the last several years we've kind of done it each on our own and then come back. What I'm doing is kind of going through and I'm making stars on the ones that I feel like I've heard a lot of expressed interest in from us. And so I was kind of hoping to maybe do it where we're discussing some of those issues to have a better idea. I don't want to go into legislative or the General Assembly and even like if it's one of our priorities, but the way that we've done it doesn't necessarily give an indication of, well, it's one of our priorities, but how do we come down on it? So like one of the new proposals that I think is going to be really, this just as an example, is to take away the weighted votes, like one district, one vote, And the way it is right now, if 5 people call for a weighted vote, then it's based on the size of the district. So basically, the west side of the state can outvote the east side of the state because of population. It's a lot of small districts that have proposed that, and it will impact us significantly. And so I just think that something like that garners a discussion, because I don't know how people would, I think I might know, but I don't want to guess. And so I'm just wondering if you guys want to, if you want me to kind of go through them all and then star the ones that are, I think, worthy of discussion, or of the most important to us. It might be that it's important and we know what our position is and okay, yes, keep going. So I don't think there'll be a ton of discussion, but I'm happy to do that. As I can't remember how many positions there are total.
I'd be really happy if you would do that, because people, of course, always can also look through all of the proposals themselves. And
There's only
if there's
59.
one they want to add on, they can.
So one of the things I think we should consider that I wasn't particularly sensitized to until, I guess, last year, is if we want to independently come up with our legislative priorities without sort of looking at what the WASD, I mean, there is the WASD sort of perspective and sort of like those options that have already been determined. But as we know, when it comes to huge issues that impact us, legislatively, the largest one was a proposed reduction in regionalization. Like, that wasn't a policy position of WASDA, though probably the most important legislative issue facing us last year. And so I think sort of maybe like a bifurcated approach of what's important to us within WASDA that has sort of already been pre-selected and, you know, checking those boxes. But then which I think really is where like the work is, you know, what's the most important legislative priority, you know, just from our perspective.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. I think that what we've kind of always done before is look at the WASDA priorities and then kind of choose the ones that we want to adopt as our own. And people are always free to bring in something specific.
Is the levy increase, local levy increase part of WASDA? For
No,
example?
I don't think, not that I've gotten to so far. I don't think so because.
It's never been.
Yeah, it's never been, and you know, we can talk, we obviously missed the window this year for proposing it. But that's more specific than there's typically proposals for. Usually it would be just more on funding, like a funding proposal or position, than something that, but that could be one of our legislative priorities, is to be more specific.
But
and-
we've got partners with Bellevue and
Yeah,
Issaquah.
for sure.
And such like that.
Well, and like what we talked about, or what I talked about at the last meeting in terms of coming up with, collaborating with other districts, basically across the state, that, you know, that would really impact us here on the east side. Seattle already got it. And then what could benefit the east side of the state, and how can we work together to advocate that, you know, they've got these needs and we have these needs, and can you please meet all of our needs? So, yeah, I mean, it's, they're kind of two different things. These are just the proposals and how we're gonna vote on them. And then WASDA just can't advocate for anything if it's not voted on.
Yeah.
But it could fall under some of the funding. I'd have to look at them more closely.
It also seems like, I feel like that would be worth doing, like, because the WASDA budget related items are usually just like super vague, like super broad, like we call on the legislature to fully fund, you know, education. It's kind of like, yeah. So it feels like something much more specific than kind of like actionable might be,
Right.
even if we can't get it approved by the whole body, even just coming together with those other districts to like do the work and put together a proposal is something that maybe then we can, even if WASDA doesn't adopt it, we can sort of like promote it through our like legislative representatives
Right.
directly, you know, as a district.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things from my perspective is, from what I've read, there's been about $1 billion collected under capital gains this past year. It seems like it's been earmarked for public education. I think WASDA is particularly when we saw how regionalization played out, likely to not take a strong position or any position. I think one of the questions from my perspective is how do we monitor and sort of say, is that the best use of those funds that are being collected? Wearing, both is representing our district, but understanding that there are needs for other school districts within the state. $1 billion would pay for, I think, what was the ask for special education over twice over. So if that was the most important legislative priority in terms of additional funding last year, then it seems that that should be sort of on the table for the funds that have been collected through long-term capital gains. Unless the understanding was, well, that is important, but the most important is, infrastructure and perhaps, critical areas. You certainly don't want to have a school that literally, falls down and risks, debt. But at the same time, we need to understand what that landscape is. There's certainly a lot of money being collected that seems like is being designated for public education. And I think we need to be, monitor that and be vigilant and fully informed to make sure that we agree with how that is being spent.
So Deborah, have you gone through this process before?
At General Assembly, I haven't. I mean, I've sat in them
Okay,
sometimes.
the process is totally different than what I expected.
Yeah.
We've always identified our top 15, and really, they made us vote on every single priority, right? So it's basically yes or no. So that is kind of useless for our, but hearing what people were talking about, there are things that, just like, for example, equity, right? When we talk about equity as it pertains to the whole state, or versus and how it impacts like Mercer Island, right? So I think it would be important to pull out priorities that of course, personally, I might agree with for the whole state, but like what you were saying, that it might have negative impact on Mercer Island. And as a board, generally, if we don't want to go through every single one and vote right now every single one, but are we all in agreement, on things that are negatively impacting Mercer Island, but in the whole larger, how people identify other things, right, for the whole state, would we still vote for Mercer Island? And so that has been personally, there are things that I would vote for individually, but then as a board member, I vote for priorities that, benefit Mercer Island District. So those are kind of things I think as we come going into, that if we're all in agreement or not, that would help.
Right, and that's always been confusing to me too, because I've sat in parts of General Assemblies, never like the entire thing, but these are position proposals, and even when there's one on equity and inclusion, it changes. Like for example, I was looking at a couple of them today, and it's changes a couple words or takes out part of the sentence or something. It's like, okay, whatever. I mean, it's important, but it's not something we need to have a big discussion on. But like I said, the weighted voting I think is significant. But that, and I have that question in terms of our priorities. It's not part of the table of contents for the General Assembly. So I know that we do that. I don't know how those are
So
chosen.
they're not. So they go through every single priority, you just yes or no.
Right.
That's it.
And so then it's just all of those are the,
I think we've usually done it where we identify our top priorities and the rest is at the discretion of the ledger rep.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the outline, in table of contents, it doesn't say any point that we vote on priorities.
You're not prioritizing it, you're just voting yes or no on everything.
Got it.
So you're spending
So
8
I would
hours.
highly suggest that, I'm happy to do the initial legwork and kind of point out, and obviously anyone can look at anything. I can even, I've already done 25% of it since there's about 40. So I can even send out my, kind of my asterisks of, look at these ones. I think these are the most, pertaining to us or the biggest changes. I might not, like if the diversity one, like a couple words changed, I don't think we need to discuss it. And I didn't think it was important. I'm happy to do that before the study session, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the month?
On the 21st.
On the 21st, which is a week before General Assembly, so it's plenty of time.
Yeah,
that
just
sound like a good plan?
make sure that you have a time, because I thought it was really quick, but it was
Oh, no,
really-
it's two full days.
Yes.
I'm
so
doing it online,
The
I'm not
voting, the
going.
voting is that whole 2 full day, and so just prepare yourself.
Yeah, no, I knew that.
I was dying.
I knew that, and I am not going to Spokane, I'm gonna sit online and do it. So it's hybrid this year.
Thank you all for taking
Even though I can go
your
to
turn.
Spokane and
Yeah.
visit.
I wasn't expecting it to like vote for 2 days. Yes or no, yes or no.
Unless, as someone wants to take part of it and vote, you're welcome.
Can you send that to
For
Ava
sure.
and I also?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to the next item. 4C, Board Policy 1011, Process for Addressing Board Member Violations, Discuss Board Member Conduct. This is a procedural issue that the board is facing because we self-govern ourselves. And with that, I will turn it over to Maggie Ty.
I have a statement that I'm gonna read. I'm calling on the board tonight to address some violations of our board member code of conduct. The code states that it is the board's responsibility to ensure its members conduct themselves in a, quote, ethical, professional, and lawful manner, including proper use of authority and appropriate decorum when acting as board members, end quote. The actions in question were committed by Director Glowitz, who on May 9th of this year sent 2 emails from his board account that threatened the superintendent repeatedly, although not in a physical manner. Among other things, one of these emails said, quote, let's keep on the path I have articulated publicly and privately during my time as a political candidate and then an elected school official, and it will be smooth sailing, end quote. The other email said, quote, I don't like to play games, but if forced to play, I will, period, and I will win, end quote. Director Glowitz CC'd these messages to every member of the Mercer Island City Council, causing some consternation at City Hall. He also sent one of these messages to several community members with a note stating that he wanted to make sure they could find the message if they made a public records request and the district, quote, inadvertently, end quote, lost it. This was a public insinuation that the district could not be trusted to follow public records law. On or around the same date, Director Glowitz called an administrative staff member and berated them over their handling of related issues using extensive profanity for a number of minutes. This is a matter of public record as well, as he later used his board email to apologize to the staff member for his language. The central core of the code of conduct is that board members may not exercise individual authority over the superintendent or staff. We are elected to become members of this body, and we are supposed to act as a body. Specifically, I believe Director Glowitz's actions violated these 3 sections of our code of conduct. Section 2A, which states, board members' interaction with the superintendent and with staff must recognize the lack of authority vested in individuals except when explicitly authorized by the board. Individual board members have no authority to give direction to staff or to the superintendent. Section 2B, board members shall not publicly express individual negative opinions about the superintendent's or a staff member's performance. Any such expressions of negative opinion regarding the superintendent's or a staff member's performance will be made only by the board after reviewing the employee performance issue in question in executive session and thereafter taking appropriate action stating the grounds for the opinion in an open public session. And finally, Section 3E, to build trust among board members and to ensure an environment conducive to effective governance, members will make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another. And this is me talking again. To be elected to serve on any school board is to be entrusted with great responsibility. As tonight's meeting agenda illustrates, this board has important decisions to make and important work to do. We cannot do this work effectively, and we cannot keep the trust of our staff or of the general public if we do not draw a crisp, clean line between appropriate exercise of our powers and inappropriate abuse of our powers. For this reason, I move that the board censure Director Glowitz for these 3 violations of the board code of conduct in the hopes that we can then move forward, having shown our commitment to operating only within our legal and ethical boundaries as a board. Thank you.
Do I have a second for that motion?
I second.
And with that, we will do discussion.
Yeah, I will limit my comments to the behavior, not to the circumstances regarding public records that engendered the behavior. I think that's a much longer conversation that I think is outside the scope of the discussion this evening. So I also have prepared remarks that are brief. Over a brief period of time this spring, during a challenging time, my behavior created a difficult working environment for my board colleagues and for staff, and for that, I have publicly apologized. 2 years ago, I ran for school board, motivated by a strong belief in a public education that provides an environment for students to thrive and reflects the unique attributes of our community. While running for office, I promised voters I would work collaboratively while asking hard questions and demanding accountability through transparency, oversight, and concrete criteria. I take the weight of that promise and responsibility seriously. Personal responsibility requires acknowledging when we fall short of the mark and committing ourselves to do better. And empathy entails listening to those apologies and graciously moving on so that we can work together to provide the best education possible to the children of our community. I look forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I appreciate your words. The board and the administration is in chaos because of your behavior. And I recognize that you have worked really hard to modify that and are hopeful that it will not happen again. I think that if we move on without any sort of recognition of that it's that it's doing a disservice to the people who are impacted, including our students. And when administration needs to be focusing on board personality issues then they're not focusing on the job that we pay them to do. So I am very eager to move forward. I think we already have started to, but I will be voting for a censure because I think not doing so sweeps it under the rug. I think it's important to make a record, and mostly for the people who were impacted by it. But like I said, I very much look forward to moving forward. I don't think it needs to be brought up again and again. I think that once, just so everyone knows, a censure is basically a public statement of violation. There are no other teeth to it. There's no punishment. It's just an acknowledgement that someone violated the code of conduct. If it was one moment in time, perhaps I wouldn't vote for a censure. It was a fairly lengthy period of chaos that had tremendous impacts on a lot of people. And I know that you feel bad about that, and I know that you were working to make amends for that, and I appreciate that very much. But I think that a censure is appropriate to make a record of it and to acknowledge the impact.
Well, thank you, Maggie Tai, for bringing this up. I think it's so important that we have our code of conduct and to be able to have these kind of conversations with each other, because we are a board and board members have to work together to serve the community. I see public censorship slightly differently. As we are working with each other, there might be misunderstanding, there might be reading each other wrong, there might be, we did bad, right? We have different definition of what crossed the line. There isn't, and so it is great that we're having the ability to have conversation to kind of figure out where's those lines, right? And what is appropriate, what is not. So for me, public censorship is more of an escalation at the very end when we have first attempt to talk to each other, when we have gone through a process of like, did you realize that this is not appropriate, this is not within our code? Did the other person acknowledge it, recognize it? Did they apologize? Are they doing better? I believe that Dan apologized at the last board meeting. He had made a statement again today, and I don't think there is any saying that those things didn't happen. Personally, as a board member, I felt that we have moved on, right? When he apologized and he said that he's gonna try better. I felt that we've moved on already, so I think the public censorship is unnecessary, and if we use censorship to escalate everything, it loses the power of the censorship, because there has to be an attempt to work with each other through all these mitigation process first. Ultimately, censorship is when the other person does not recognize, is unwilling to change, then that's for me, the end point. So again, I think we have different boundaries or points of how we see these things. But that is what is so good about having a board. So I would vote no, given that Dan has apologized last time and again today.
I just want to respond quickly. I appreciate your words. I don't want, I've been on the board now for almost 6 years, and it's never been used. So I don't think it's something that is taken lightly at all. Like I said, if it was one moment in
It
time.
was used once
No,
during
no. There
my
was,
predecessor.
yeah, that was before I was on the board.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
in my time on the board, it has not been used in 6 years, almost 6 years. I think it's very significant. I think what also we need to pay attention to is when this happened, which was April, May, I don't remember the exact dates, and that there were attempts to move forward at that time. I'm not going to talk in detail about it, but your comments, I think, I think it's misrepresenting all of the things that have happened since then in order to get to the healing that we are at now. And like I said, I think there's been significant more than attempts to mitigate what happened.
But we're not talking about that, right? Are we talking public censorship as?
It says sure.
Censorship, are we quantifying kind of things that are being done? Or is it a process of, hey, these things were violated, the first thing that we do is check with each other, and then the other
Which
person.
we did.
Yeah, and so for me, it's just like we checked, and then he again recognized that, and so that what was wrong, and then you apologize. So for me, I'm not making any judgment beyond what I experience at board meetings and what people say. I take people for what this is. I don't know people's heart, but based on what the response to not the accusation, but to the charge brought forth, has met my kind of criteria of recognition, apology, and moving forward already.
I think it's complicated because you make some really good points, but there's the internal question of like what impact does this have on the board, and what steps has the board taken, or what further steps would the board need to take. But there's also like the district itself and like how the district staff functions. And so it's like, are we as a board allowing a situation to persist where, like, have we allowed a situation to exist where people have been subjected to a hostile work environment? Like, we are the ones in this situation that have the power to say something, to say, this behavior is not acceptable. Our staff can expect us to follow the rules. So I see it as like, it's like Swiss clockwork, right? So there's like the stuff happening at this level within the board internally, but then it's also like, I feel my obligation, the reason that I made this motion is that I feel it's really important to send a message to the staff that we will have their backs, that we understand where that line is, and that we will respect that line as board members.
So we have done that, I think, in for other conversation, that we have validated that these are not proper behaviors, that we don't support this. I think we have that, but part of this, to censure someone, for me, it's just like at the very end of a process if other things aren't working out, right? And that we've talked about potentially as a board writing a statement about how kind of we're committed to working as, what is our kind of behavior to community, right? We talked about all those things. So This is one way to do it. I don't think it's an effective way to show people, but I just, it's a danger if we use it, I guess, lightly. And there's other ways to show staff that this was not appropriate. And I think we have.
I will say, thank you very much, Maggie Tai, for raising this. You've been very brave, and I know you've gone above and beyond to work on this issue multiple times, so that is most appreciated. I think staff has also seen that, and they've been present in some of the meetings, so that's also most appreciated. Clearly, Dan is understanding this. I think being public about this issue is very important, so that everyone sees the problem, the board takes it seriously, and remedies are being put in place. My concern with censure is similar to Tam's, that I see censure as when everything has not worked, and this process has not worked, and there is still a problem, then we would do censure. Not that it has, the person would still be allowed to be on the board, but I think other things would then also have to be done with respect to constraints around that person's boardroom presence. So that's what I think censure would lead to, since I think this is kind of like the final chance, right? And I appreciate that being public record. In the next 2 years at least of a person's term, this is public record now. And if there's a problem, then you've had your final chance tonight. So that's the way I see it. So I probably will not be voting for censure for that reason. But I totally appreciate the public record. Do not condone the behavior in any way. Appreciate the changes that have been made, but I'm willing to give a second chance. I have been threatened with censure in my board term, so I find it a silencing effect, and it tries to shut down people. So I'm not exactly a fan of censure for that reason. So I'll say I was threatened with censure for responding to email. So, I don't want it to lose its weight. So with that, any other discussion?
The only discussion I have is process. Is it appropriate to vote on whether or not there were violations, and then on a potential remedy or not?
I think the motion on the table right now is about censure. We could
Well, you can't censure someone without violations. So I think they're two separate.
Yeah, I'm happy to withdraw my original motion.
No, Maggie Tai listed the violations.
Yeah, but that's like.
Right, but they're two, you can find violations and not take action on
But
it.
I think those violations, maybe, we've had discussions about this leading to this point.
Only in private. This is the first time this is brought up in public. That's
These are public records that Maggie Tai
Is referencing.
raised, yeah.
Right, but I mean.
I don't think there's any point to try, I think, I'm very glad we've had the conversation, I'm very glad to have, the discussion in public, people can look up the records themselves if they're interested.
Yeah, those public records that Maggie Tai raised are public records, they are
Yeah.
real.
Like all of
There's no denying
Yeah.
of those public records. They do not pass any litmus test of board member behavior. Right. I don't think there's any disagreement on that.
Okay, as long as I don't want to beat a dead horse. I'm not trying to embarrass or make anyone feel bad anymore. I just think, it's not, there has to be, censure is of really honestly no significance. It's even less than a letter in a personnel file. So I just don't want people out there who also experience the behaviors to think that you know, if it happens again, someone's getting kicked off the board, because that doesn't happen. There's no remedy for that. I'm not suggesting that happens. But there's no remedy for that. It's not like if you get 6 censures, you're off the board. The only way to get someone off the board is if they resign or if there's a recall. So it's not like a regular job where you can be fired from it. So I just don't want a misperception that a censure is more powerful than it's basic. I don't want to say it's a public scolding, but everything we do is in public. We are elected by the public and we're held accountable by the public. And the public, we've chose self-governing. And I think that the public has a right to know whether or not the board believes that the behaviors were a violation of the code of conduct. And I think that trying to wiggle, yes, it's uncomfortable. I've had allegations too. They didn't come to the public because they didn't come that far, just like yours didn't. And so this did, because it didn't get to a private,
Executive.
a private solution without it coming to the board, which is why the motion was made today. So I just,
what solution did you want?
I'm not looking for a solution. I want acknowledgement that there were violations to the board.
Do you want me to, do you think I should withdraw my motion and then make a separate motion?
I mean, that's up to you, but I think they're two very separate things. And I mean, as you both have said, you're acknowledging that there were violations of the code of conduct. That's meaningless. And if you both are going off the board soon, if there's future issues, we really have no record that the board found violations of the code of conduct. And maybe it's the lawyer in me, I don't know, but there is no actual board finding that there were violations of the code of conduct. And I think I make a motion that the board make
I have to take mine
findings
off first.
of.
Or we could vote on the censure issue and then do the.
Okay, fine. Let's vote on the censure issue first and then we'll make another, and then make a motion after that.
I mean, I guess so. I think we need to find violations in order to get to a vote of censure. So I would think that would need to come first.
Erin?
Well, typically there are censures, and basically in voting that there's a censure is an admission that there's a policy violation. So if there's a conclusion that there's a censure, that would be a finding of a policy violation. If you could then separately bring a motion that says just of the policy violation, there was a conclusion or a vote that says there's non-censure, you could do that separately. But finding censure is finding a policy violation, so you don't necessarily have to separate them out.
But
To
in this
answer your
case,
question. And I just want to clarify one thing, there was a reference, and this just is for the public, of a private conversation or a private meeting. Really, I think what the board is referencing, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't at any of these meetings, or at those meetings, what you're referencing are executive sessions.
yes.
I was hesitant.
So,
Yeah,
so let's go ahead and just vote on my original motion and then see what we want to do after that. Okay?
Okay, first we'll take Asha, for respect for you and your position and your neutrality, I won't call on students this time, perhaps, since this is a board self-governance issue, unless you feel otherwise.
I don't want to vote on it, I abstain, but I would like to say that I think there is some merit in publicly saying when a board member does something wrong. And I think there is merit in having proof and have it in public records that a board member did negatively impact employees of the district, especially because during that time, I can remember specifically, Andrew and I did see the negative impact that it did have on our administration and it did have on everyone like in the boardroom. So I just think that it's really, you should put it on public record that something did happen.
Thank you. Okay, with that, on the vote of censure for Director Glowitz, all in favor?
Aye.
Against?
Nay.
Aye. Nay. Okay, so that is 2-3 against censure. Deborah, would you like to make your motion around violation of board member? Maggie Ty, you may also make it too.
Thank you. I move that we find Director Glowitz violated the board code of conduct as referenced by Maggie Tice.
Sections 2A, 2B, and 3B.
Okay. Do you have a second?
Oh, second, sorry. I forgot that was making a noise.
Sorry, okay. Asha, again, any discussion?
I do. I'm still, like, I don't understand in this process then. If we do the censoring, and we have voted on that, and so then doing the violation, is that a normal process that we do?
We can do whatever we want within the guidelines of the law in Washington State.
This is board self-governance.
Yeah.
We govern ourselves and we run by our own principles. We do have a policy to find board members in violation of code of conduct. It's the one in our agenda. It could lead to a violation of code of conduct, which is in our board self-evaluation. It could also lead to censure. Those are two separate things. We've utilized both. We have found the board in violation of code of conduct before.
For related reasons.
Without going to censure.
Well, so if this is something that we can do for self-governance, then fine, we'll go with it. But I also want to caution that once we start breaking down the ability just to have a conversation with each other and say, hey, Tam, you're crossing the line, or I don't think that was good, then it really kind of puts us on a very, I don't know, a very difficult position to be really honest with each other. And so that's kind of my concern in anything that we do. And I will tell you from a woman of color perspective, I will probably be censored more often than Dan will, as a white man. So it's kind of, it's a tricky position for me. But if we're gonna continue with the conversation and if there's objectively things that you have raised is one thing, but I'm also not happy with the fact that we're going through this process.
I appreciate your words, but I think your implications are actually incorrect. I think the board took tremendous attempts at resolving this matter prior to being here today, and I think that what you're saying is implying that we didn't. There were personal conversations, there were letters, there were phone calls, and there were hours and hours of meetings.
But he apologized twice before this moment.
Absolutely he did.
So at this moment, we have, and so whether we like it or not, it has come to this point where if, at this point, Dan has apologized twice. So then from our perspective, what are we still looking for?
But just because someone does something wrong and then apologizes for it doesn't take away the behavior that happened and the impact it had on the other people. You're looking at just the way that it impacts Dan and not the way that it impacted Maggie Ty and other employees and individuals in the district.
So I guess
you can go into a court of law and plead guilty to a crime and the judge says, I'm not imposing any sanctions. They are two completely separate things. One is, did you do what it is that is alleging? And then two is, then if so, what do we do about it, if anything?
So yes, I guess we see it differently, and how we have conversation and how we behave and how we govern ourselves. So I guess how we govern ourselves, for me, is having a relationship conversation, and then when it is, and then I hope that I can make multiple mistakes that may be violating board policy, that you can have conversation with me, and I would say, oh, I didn't see it that way. And that if I change and I apologize, that it doesn't have to be. So I'm not quantifying, like impact or that, I don't think we should, but then that also put us in murky ground. And so that's just kind of where
that's because according to our policy, that's the first step. If someone believes there was a violation, is a conversation. Which we have. Yes, we did.
Yeah. So this, Tim, though, from my point of view, is an attempt to address your concern about doing a censure. It's like, we just want to place it on the record that as a group, we think that behavior was not acceptable and should not be repeated. And I really very much appreciate Dan's words tonight. They sound very sincere. Like, I really appreciate that change is being made. But for me, this is part of a bigger pattern. There were similar behaviors to this for the last 2 years, and it was like toe on the line. And so this is so solidly across the line. Like, there is a reason why I moved to find our own board not in compliance with our board code of conduct back in April, before all of this happened. And it was because of similar types of issues, right? And so, like from my point of view, it's not a big ask to just acknowledge that like these behaviors were not acceptable, and we certainly hope will never be repeated. That's all. And that's, we've now separated out, we're not doing a censure. So there's actually like zero impact, like in terms of like stuff happening, you know what I mean, to the person.
I guess we already said it multiple times, that's why I do feel like it is beating the horse to death many times, whatever, that, yeah. But it is, we have said it, that it was not right, and we acknowledged it. So I guess, you know, how we deal with our students, how we deal with each other, it is, if we're saying that we have gone through the process, but then we say, but it has such huge impact. But that's where my concern is, because we have gone through this process with each other in executive meetings, right? In conversation. And so that's kind of where I see an escalation, and I feel like we've done all these things, but we're still not satisfied. And we have to go through. And so that's just kind of where, but if we're objectively going through this process, then yes, no one's denying those things happen, right? But I just,
But in order for the board to actually do something, we have to take a vote, because each individual may have said, and not everyone has said that it's a board violation, but if each individuals don't matter, that's one of the allegations. Our own opinion or position doesn't matter, it's the board as a whole. And we can't have a board belief that the code of conduct was violated unless the board votes that there was a violation of the code of conduct.
But I guess if it happened to me, I would be very upset if I recognize and I apologize and I want to move forward.
And we probably
And you're
would
like,
be here.
and we still gonna.
But that was
yeah.
like 3 months ago. You're, by saying that, you're
You
implying that those
apologized at
things
last
didn't.
meeting.
Right, but what happened, what happened in May?
I don't know that we're really gonna get anywhere.
We're not gonna get anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I just want to remind, the point, or the policy itself as is written, it says in the event of a member's willful and continuing violation of policy, the board will seek remedy through the following processes. Discussion between the offending member and the full board. Such discussion shall be held in executive session, consistent, if appropriate, consistent with policy 1410. It's my understanding, again, was not present, that there was a meeting. There was then the discussion now, which is again another opportunity to discuss amongst the board, which is what is occurring. So to your original question, I was just going back to what you originally asked, like, is this appropriate? And it said, if necessary, public censure of the offending member of the board. There's been a vote to determine that's not appropriate, but this is just part of the process, is this discussion. So again, the idea is that every person on the board would have a vote. Again, Asha, everyone has a right to abstain. So just to answer your question, what does the policy provide? And that is the policy as you govern. And you're correct, President D'Souza, that in the past there have been conclusion that there's the board has violated policy with absent censure.
Can we just move to a vote?
Yeah, okay. So let's move to a vote. In the case of Deborah's motion that the actions committed by Director Glones are in violation of board policy as described by Maggie Tai. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And against?
Nay.
Abstain.
Abstain. I'm not saying that Dan didn't do these things and that we shouldn't.
Just voted no.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that I don't believe the process is like last
So
meeting.
the vote is 2-1.
Yeah, I said
Oh, I
first vote
didn't
is
know.
The vote is 2-1.
Yeah. I think that's our first 2 abstentions since I joined the board. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. And 5, so let's keep moving. 5, full governance process monitoring. Erin, I think this is you.
Apparently, yes. So this is the annual board policy 1001. This is the compliance, and I apologize, I'm trying to open it up because I had gone back to the other policy. So it's just to create the schedule in the planning cycle. I think this has been reviewed, and so you have to decide if you're in compliance or not.
So could I have a motion to find the board in compliance of our annual agenda planning? We do have a We do have our calendar, so,
I move that we find the board in compliance with our annual agenda planning.
second,
Second.
all in favor?
I,
Aye. Asha?
sorry.
Sorry. Against? And with that, that's a 1050 vote. Let's move on, I think it's consent agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second,
Seconded.
all in favor, Asha?
Aye.
And directors?
I,
Aye. Against? That's 1050 for the consent agenda. Erin, any superintendent announcements? You should
Since I'm in
make
this
one while you
acting,
have the
I
seat.
should make one. I will say that we've had a very productive week. We had new staff orientation, our certificated staff and classified staff, this week on Monday and Tuesday. Appreciation to the board members, Dan and Deborah Lurie, who were both able to make it to the new certificated staff orientation. It's appreciated every year to have board presence, so thank you. And I went very well, and today was the kickoff day of professional development with our keynote speaker on belonging up at the high school. All certificated staff are present, as well as our classified staff could get clock hours, so professional development as well. So it's been quite successful. We're excited to have students back. We had also fees and photos up at the high school already with people going through. As a parent for the first time of a high schooler, I will say that it was very well run from a parent's perspective and efficient. So I think we had a bunch of eager students. Hats off to all the students and staff who made it an easy process, including Asha, who was there representing a club for the news. I think it was the newspaper, is that right? So it was a great way to see really all the benefits and opportunities our students have from the very first day of school. So I think that was great, and we have 6th graders, and I just spoke to a parent earlier today who has kindergartner who's excited to start next week. So next week is the start of school, so we do start before Labor Day as a friendly reminder. And just hats off to everyone in the organization. None of these things can happen without staff throughout our district. Learning services, especially with respect to professional development, they do a lot of work, including our superintendent, to make it a success and to make it meaningful for our staff, and hopefully will result in our students feeling more like they belong in staff as well. So
Thank you.
that's my opportunity taken.
Thank you. Congratulations. Legislative rep update, I think we covered that. Let's quickly do, so the board assignments, do we have a spreadsheet for that, Karen? Do we have it online?
I have no idea.
It's in your email.
It's in your email?
It was linked to from the board update, the
I was
last
so excited
superintendent's
that I was
board
prepared.
update.
Well, you can use this if you want.
Oh,
Because Michelle has a copy as well.
share you the link.
yeah, I think people wanted to see this and to be able to pick, right?
Yeah, just to be clear, for the listening public, this is just short term, over the next few months, because we'll have to reorganize committees.
Reshuffle
We'll have to reshuffle again when we get new board members, so this is just, my schedule's changed, some other people's schedules may be changing. We need to trade around a few committees.
it's listed in the agenda too, not in chart form.
Yeah,
But the chart is linked to from the
And I can,
board update.
From
I
Friday.
don't know, I can
Yeah.
send this perhaps, Andrews, if I send you the link, could you put it up online? Would that be helpful?
yeah, that would be helpful, yes. Yeah, so that we can all see the big picture where, where we're gonna be at what time.
I'm sorry that I'm not as adept at doing this. There's a reason why he's in charge, right? Did you get that?
Is it?
I just sent it to your, should I send it somewhere?
In the board update email, there was a link
Yeah, we
to
did have a link.
the
From this last
chart.
Yeah, Fred sent it.
Yeah.
I don't have access to that email.
I don't have a link then.
I'll send it.
I think I'm getting it right now.
Maybe she'll send it.
I'll email it to everyone.
I can email it to people as well.
I
You do,
Yeah, don't email the link though.
It's not Google Doc, right?
yeah. There you go. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Or Director Robinson.
Yeah, it says committee assignments repeat.
Yes.
It was in the previous weeks as well. And then there's a link to the blank grid.
There you are.
Okay, let's start with the Island Park Pack.
Can you do that okay? Do you want me to make it larger?
Can you see that?
Can you see it on the?
Oh, yeah.
No, but this is the,
So part of this is like we have to know what day, what time, do we have all those?
it's all in the,
It's all in the agenda.
it's all in the agenda. But here you go, no. I have a printout. In
So I
large
can read
font.
it out if that's helpful.
Yes.
As we go through. So if you want to go back, Director Robinson, they're perfect.
I'm with
So
you.
if we start with Island Park PAC, the PAC meets from 4 to 5 p.m. on Tuesdays, specifically 10:10, 1:16, 3:12, 5:14. A Zoom link is available upon request. So that is the Island Park PAC, which meets on Tuesdays from 4 to 5 p.m.
I can do that, but again, these are, you don't have to read out all the dates because this is only the fall. So,
I will read through.
So Maggie Ty, Island Park Pack,
Sure.
okay. Lake Ridge Pack,
Lake Ridge PAC meets from 1:30 to 3 p.m. on Mondays. The applicable dates are October 2nd and December 4th.
okay. Who'd like to do Lake Ridge?
I don't mind doing research as well because I've been on that pack for the last year and I don't have a conflict with that. So
Okay,
I can do 2 elementary schools.
okay. Let's do Northwood Pack,
Northwood Elementary, the PAC meets from 10 to 11 a.m. on Thursdays. 10/26, I don't know if you want me to read December as well, but it's December 12th.
I'd be happy to do Northwood.
okay.
And Zoom link is available for that too.
Dan will do that.
West Mercer Elementary, are we comfortable
Yeah.
moving on?
West Mercer Elementary,
The PAC meets from 3 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays, October 11th and December 6th. A Zoom link is available.
anybody would like to do that?
That was you, right?
That was me, so.
I did West last.
Oh, no, sorry, okay.
So, actually, can I do Islander, yeah, I'm just seeing what I can do.
So Tam, you'd like to do Islander Middle School?
Islander Middle School, yes.
Okay, so who'd like to do West Mercer?
I know it's crazy, but I don't mind also doing West Mercer. I can do 3 elementary schools, that's my limit.
Okay. I would be happy to do that too, but that sounds fine. What's the schedule? High school pack,
And the high school PAC meets in person only, and that's 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. unless otherwise noted.
on what date?
That is Thursdays, October 12th is the only.
Yeah, Thursdays.
I would like to do that, so I don't have as much visibility into the high school.
Okay.
So I don't have any students that have gone through.
Okay. Board president, board vice president.
Okay.
Okay, PTA council,
Meets from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. in the boardroom and Zoom unless otherwise noted. On Wednesdays, September 13th, October 11th, November 8th, and December 6th.
I'm happy to do PTA council. Okay, DEI committee, PTA DEI,
So PTA DEI meets monthly on the second Monday from 7 to 8:15 p.m. via Zoom, unless otherwise noted. 9/11 is going to be, or September 11th is a hybrid, and then October 9th, November 13th, and December 11th, excuse me.
would like to do PTA DEI.
Tam, is that you? Has
I'm
that
used
been
to,
you?
but, I want to do the advocacy committee because on Fridays I'm good.
Well, advocacy is sled track,
Oh,
unless you want to take.
never,
those
no,
two.
never mind. No, I'm just looking at like, okay, I'm available Fridays and then, the Mondays were hard, like that time was hard because I do carpool.
Yeah, I can do the PTA, I'll do the PTA DEI committee,
Okay, so did you get that, Michelle?
okay? Superintendent Equity Advisory Council,
So that's the one that I have to get off, unfortunately. It's such a great group, it's really
Did we-
impressive to be part of it.
Excuse me, did we skip over the superintendent community advisory committee?
oh, yes, I was coming to that next, but yeah, my order
Sorry.
was a little bit different. Yeah,
Sorry, I
let's
was just
use-
going off the.
You're right, let's go off the agenda, Superintendent Community Advisory.
Meets 3 times a year, boardroom, Zoom link available upon request, 9:30, 10:30 a.m., Wednesdays.
I would like to do that. I thought that when it came to regionalization, some of those relationships worked well in terms of the city council. and like-
Superintendent Advisory, okay,
Yeah.
Dan. And then Superintendent Equity,
It's this, SEAC meets 5 times
I
a
can do
year, boardroom, Zoom link available upon request on Thursdays, 3 to 5 p.m.
I can do it.
Perfect.
Dan can do that, okay. Looks like Tam has 2, Maggie Ty has 3, David has 3, Deborah is missing, Dan has 4.
I think
I think
Three.
more.
I have 3, I think.
Oh, sorry, 3, yeah,
North Mercer, the high school,
yeah.
and the community advisory.
Superintendent Teaching and Learning Advisory.
I can take that.
That's Wednesdays from 3 to 4:30.
Ledge Rep is Deborah, PTA Advocacy,
That's part of Ledger.
That's part of the lunch room. And that meets monthly on the 3rd Friday from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m.
so you had all yours filled out for later.
Well,
Okay.
they're all kind of the same,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
that's fine.
Inclusive practices,
The dates are to be determined. A Zoom link will be made available. I know that makes it challenging to say if you can do it or not. It does say that it's a mix of Zoom and in person, so it seems to
Sure.
be hybrid.
I can do that.
And there'll be,
Assuming it's always Zoomable, I can do
They
that.
won't
There will be-
always be.
oh,
there'll be
There's
4
2.
virtual meetings and end of year in-person conference. So there is one in-person conference.
well, and
Do
then
we
the
know the
next
date?
one is East Side Directors Group.
That's not a thing.
defunct.
That's
Oh, it's
not a thing
defunct.
anymore. We
Oh.
can take it off the list, actually, Michelle. Next time we have dates.
So inclusive practices,
Just strike it through right now.
any takers? I can also take that if needed,
Sorry, inclusive practices?
yeah,
If you want to do it, that'd be great.
sure. Okay,
That is all that's on.
that's all we've got, thank you, wow.
That was a lot of work.
This was Maggie Ty's invention. This
That will be
was,
my greatest legacy.
this was very good. I mean, we need
Used
to
to
put,
be total chaos.
we need to put this in board policy, so it's part of the policy.
Aaron, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Note 14 and 15 says board president and board vice president.
Yeah, that's mine and Dan's, so we take that automatically.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
By
So,
default, yeah.
okay,
It's just to, it's,
I see what you're saying.
we added it in so that it doesn't get overlooked, so it doesn't look like someone's only doing 2 jobs when they're actually serving as board president, which is like
Which
equals
is a
like
big
3 or
job.
4 committee assignments, so.
All right, thank you. Announcements, inquiries, and reports. Any announcements, inquiries, or reports?
Well, no, like this is kind of like my experience, like what you're saying, Erin, and as a parent, going through the back to school, all the kids are, they got all their stuff, so thank you to all the teachers and the staff and volunteers. It was really nice, especially at the middle school. The computer was, they were so excited, they got elevated. Because they were expecting the iPad, and then Gabriel opened up, he's like, ooh. So they totally are excited about their new elevated kind of iPad or computer. And I just thought the process went really smooth. Just to, so I'm really impressed by our ability to really kind of build a very close kind of like opportunity for students to explore their school, but also be very effective in getting all the information out there. Yeah.
Any other?
I just wanted to make a brief comment about Labor Day coming up. I think particularly with all the infrastructure and sewer work on the island, and recognizing the importance of laborers both within our community and also in our school district. We just heard when it came to the 1-year renewal with MIEA that salaried staff is getting a more significant raise. And I think that's an appreciation of the extent to which, when it comes to the grounds, facilities, maintenance, how vital that is. And of course, like around the island for the next few years, I think we're particularly sensitized to that, but enjoy Labor Day, and thank you for everyone who labors on the island.
Asha, since you didn't have a student report, have anything to offer?
Just off the top of my head, most of the sports had tryouts this past week, or if they're no cuts, they started their official practices. So I think students are really excited to get back to football games and all that stuff. And I don't know if students are dreading or excited to come back home and say they're a kid, but we all picked up our textbooks and Beads and Photo Day went super smoothly. So it's going to be a great start to the year, and yeah.
Thank you very much. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, students? Directors? Aye. Against? And with that, it's 1050 to adjourn, and we are done before 8 this night. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'm gonna go ahead and credit for that.
Yes?
Aaron, these books for us?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for helping.
Aaron, so Rudy is excited to take over here?
Ceridian's gonna be here,
Okay.
so I'm
With
gonna have a kiddo at the high school.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's a little nervous. It was a bit overwhelming for him, I think, and he had to check every box.
Where
on the
did he
thing.
go to? Or where was he before?
Well, he was in the UK,
Oh, okay.
and then, yeah. But he went, and then he was, Eastside Catholic for me. But he was
Oh, but he didn't want to continue?
in,
Michelle, can I borrow pens?
yes.
Is that, we don't have anything?
I think, you know, he wanted an opportunity to go to school with people who lives here and, you know, he had, like, in his community. So,
What is he gonna
he's
try out
been
for?
to 6 schools, so.
Oh my God.
He's not doing football, he might do water polo,
Oh, yeah?
and he's gonna try out for lacrosse and basketball. But I think those are both cut sports.
Yes. Well, basketball is for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not
Really fast.
sure so. But water polo is certainly